Okay, so we want to talk about the map function, the reduce function, and the filter function. They are all available on array instances and they're pretty simple to use. Let's start with the filter function. So here I have an array of the first 5 natural numbers, and let's say for some reason I want 2 and 3, right? I want to extract them out into their own array. So we can use the filter function for that. Naturals.filter. The filter function accepts a function as its first argument, and this function is basically used as a predicate. That means something to test something else. And all this function has to do is return true or false. So the first argument to the predicate function is something we call the current value, and the current value is basically all the different elements in the array. Now what filter does is it takes your predicate function and executes it for each and every element. So it's gonna run it for 1, for 2, for 3, and all these different elements will be the current value inside the function. So I want 2 and 3. And all I'm gonna do is say current value equals 2 or current value is 3. So whenever current value is 2 or 3, this function is going to return true. And that's what the filter function is looking for. Whenever the function returns true, it's going to remember the element for which the function returned true. And when we logged this array out, so yeah, the filter function returns back an array. When we log this array out, we can see that we got 2 and 3. So that's how the filter function works. You provide a predicate function. This predicate function is run for each and every element of the array. If the predicate function returns true, that element is basically remembered. Besides the current value, you also have the current index, which is, well, the current index of whatever element for which this predicate function is being called for. So if we log out the index, current index, we should see it going from 0 to whatever, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's the indexes for all these different elements. Okay, so that's the filter function. It's very simple. Next we have the map function. So I have the first 5 natural numbers and I want to, well, let's say I want to convert them to the first 5 even numbers. So very simple, right? All I have to do is multiply each one by 2. So let's call this one events naturals.map, and just like the filter function, it also accepts another function as its first argument. And again, this function also accepts actually accepts more arguments. So the first argument is the current value, the next argument is the current index. Now it's obvious what they are. And this function also is expected to return some value, but this time the value can be anything. So I want to convert 1 into 2, 2 into 4, 3 into 6. So you take current value times 2. And you log out evens, and you can see that that's exactly what it did. It took one array and converted it into another array. So that's how the map function works. This function is called for each and every element, and whatever that function returns is taken as the value that you want that element to be mapped to. So I want one to be mapped to this, so it's mapped to that. It's basically you create new values and you store them in the exact position as whatever current value is in, right? So if it's 1, it's in index 0, so you store it in index 0. For 2, you find this and you store it in index 1, and so on and so forth. Although you have to be careful here, because even though naturals and evens here have the exact same length, right? Whenever you call map, the mapped function, I mean this array here, is always going to have the exact same length as the array that you called it on. But these two arrays are different, right? They are not the same. They're two completely different arrays. So again, this return value can be anything. It can be something useful like this, it can be null, it can even be the value that you're just passing. So yeah, I mean, there are many interesting uses for what's it called, for the map function. It comes up pretty often whenever you're working with mostly a lot of numbers in databases. Okay, so that's the map function, very simple to use. And finally we have the reduce function. So I have the first 5 natural numbers and I want to find the sum of all the first 5 natural numbers. So we pass an array, and we also pass something called the initial value. The initial value is the second argument. This function is a little different. The first argument is something called, you call it accumulator, and the second argument is the current value, and the third argument is the current index. Again, this function is supposed to return something, and let's write the code first, and then we'll see how it works. Log sum, and we get value 15, which is correct. So 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5, that's 15. So how does this work? So the accumulator is a value that keeps changing, right? So we have here 0, and obviously this function is called for each element, right? So we have 0 here. So for the very first element, the accumulator is going to be the initial value, 0. And current value is obviously going to be the element. So let's start with 1. Accumulator is 0, current value is 1. 0 plus 1 is 1. Now this return value is going to be the accumulator for the next element in the array. So 0 plus 1 is 1. 1 is going to be the accumulator for 2. 1 plus 2 is 3. 3 is going to be the accumulator for the next element. 3 plus 3 is 6, and so on. And finally, when we hit the last element, right, by that time accumulator is 10. 10 plus 5 is 15. This last return is what is returned back here. So that's how you get it. Now this initial value is actually optional, and even if we didn't have that, this would work just fine. But how is that possible? This function is supposed to be called for each individual element. That's actually not always true. Whenever you don't provide an initial value, the accumulator is going to be the first element of the array, and this function is actually going to start executing from the second element of the array. So you have 1, second element is 2, so 1 plus 2. 1 plus 2 is 3, and then you go on to the next element. So the best way to see it is to just log each time this function is called. So the important thing is the number of times it's called and what the accumulator is going to be for the very first element. Right. So we're going to run this, and we see it run exactly 4 times because no optional value. If we provide, no initial value. If we provide an initial value, it's going to be run 5 times. So that's how the reduce function works. So just remember that if you don't provide an initial value, the accumulator is going to be the very first element of the array, and this function is going to start running from the second element. If you do provide an initial value, that initial value is going to be the accumulator, and it's going to be the first accumulator at least, and the function is going to start from the very first element. So that's the reduce function. So to recap, the filter function is basically used to extract some part of an array, right, that meets some kind of criteria, some kind of condition. The map function is used to convert all the values in an array into some other values. And reduce function is meant to take all the values in an array and bring them down to just one value, right? So you're just reducing all of that to just something smaller. And that's it.